Any resident that wishes to speak at this point in time? Yes, sir. Please state your name for the record before she types it.
David Janke, 8428 Eastwood Road. I didn't get a handout, so I couldn't go through the thing there, but one of my questions was when you just look at the general fund, and maybe there was some back there, I didn't know where they were.
There is one included in the public book there.
Okay,
And if you
yeah.
want a copy, I could certainly provide you one.
That was just a general fund there. I looked at the payments on this golf course thing, which are very, very extensive going up through the years here, and they've never been able to make those payments. Is that included in this budget? Or are we going to just think the golf course is going to turn around and make money?
It has never been included in the general
Right.
fund budget.
It never has been because we thought the golf course was going to pay. We were told it was going to pay for itself. But that didn't happen. But now I look at this payment schedule, which is very extensive. You seen the payment schedule on the golf course?
I have not had time to look at the golf course yet.
Well, it's pretty extensive, this payment on the golf course, and where's that going to come from?
Well, I think the easy answer is that the city's looking at alternate funding sources, the billboard specifically, to try and alleviate that expense from coming down to the taxpayers, Dave. And then we will, I think, within 3 to 4 years, be in a position where we could refinance to get away from the really poor financing that was put together on the initial run. But trying to get more specifically at, if we don't find alternate funding sources in the near future, those additions, I'm assuming, are coming out of the fund balance. Okay.
Well, the sign thing isn't going to fly the way I understand. I mean, so we're again assuming that, I mean, this is a pretty substantial payment, this golf course thing,
Absolutely.
and it isn't even reflected in our budget. Are we going to get surprised now that we're going to, I mean, have we any idea where we're going to get this money?
The bond payment is reflected in the golf course budget.
Okay, I thought the payments on the golf course that, I thought you just said that it was not.
Well, it hasn't always been paid for out of the golf course fund in the past because adequate funding hasn't been available. We have budgeted for it in the golf course fund, and assuming all the assumptions are correct, we may be able to make the payment. Otherwise, it will be paid for with fund balance.
Okay, wait a minute now. You said you funded it in the golf course,
That's
thinking that
correct.
that's going to pay for it.
That's where it currently is, yes.
But it hasn't. I mean, reality, it has not happened.
Well, one of the items that the new finance director is going to be looking at is what makes sense out at the golf course. For example, we talk a lot about being the first golf course to open and the last one to close, and no one has ever done any calculations to determine, is it cost effective to be open in November or to be open in, March during the course of the year? Are personnel costs exceeding what our revenues? Those are some of the things that Charlie will be looking into. He is going to be putting together a profit and loss statement for the golf course during this coming year, and so the council will actually be able to look at what are the profits we're bringing in as opposed to the cost that it's taking in order to bring those profits in. We have not really kept track of those very carefully in the past. We've had costs in the past for the golf course that have been paid for out of the general fund, and we have made a real concerted effort to make sure that those costs are reflected in the golf course fund if they are golf course expenditures.
Okay, one other item then, and I apologize for not pursuing that there. The community center. Now, when the community center was built, I remember sitting in a meeting. In fact, I looked up the old tapes. That was going to pay for itself with all the things there. And we know it hasn't done that either. That was a promise that that was full of air. The community center is costing us a lot of money every month. And I'm not speaking against the community center. I'm only saying that they said the activities over there would pay for the community center, which rose from 4.5 to 7 point some million to build it. Is that being taken out of our general fund? Is that in our budget?
There is a $50 transfer to the community center fund in
A
order to make.
$50,000.
$50,000.
Yeah,
I was gonna say, I would have been walked away
No,
happy.
sorry, $50,000 transfer from the general fund to the community center fund in order to make that budget work.
Is that a month?
No, that is a year.
$50,000 from the general fund to support the community center.
That is correct.
Has that
And
been
all these
adequate?
expenses and this air thing and everything, is that included in that?
Right now, all the
there was-
expenditures for the community center are being taken out of the community center fund. Maybe, Charlie, you might want to address the community center fund. Charlie has been trying to make some differentiation between the various entities that reside over in the community center, but with some difficulty, and maybe he could address that.
I can understand.
One of the few changes that I attempted to make in the format of this year's budget was to take the community center and split it out, the 4 activities that are taking place in there, which are, the major ones are the YMCA, the banquet facility, leased space to community education, and leased space to a daycare facility. And this was presented to the City Council as an alternative budget format at the last work session. I did caution the council that my efforts to take the expenses and divvy them up was based on a limited understanding that I have of the community center operations at the current time. And so we're going to need some months or perhaps 6 months or a year of revenues and expenses coming in with us looking at each one as it's being processed and trying to properly apportion it to the right activity before we'll get to the point where we have reliable numbers that the council can be making decisions on for the community center and the 4 activities that are taking place there.
If I can ask a question of you, Charlie, specifically Kathleen's point on the $50,000 transfer, is that $50,000 being distributed equally amongst the operating costs of the community center in a whole, or is one particular tenant getting more than any others? It's question 1A.
In the budget format that I presented to you, I showed that being under the YMCA. That was the operation that had the greatest shortfall of revenues versus expenses. And so the other 3 were more or less self-supporting.
Okay. And has that $50,000 to the YMCA been adequate, or have they exceeded operation versus revenues with that $50,000 transfer?
As I presented it to you, the YMCA would still have a shortfall of revenues, but there again, that gets back to where I cautioned you that I'm not sure that I have distributed all of the expenses in a fair and equitable fashion.
Okay. Thank you.
But Charlie, with our $50,000 input into the community center fund, everything as an overall balance is over there, and we don't expect a shortfall total,
No,
whether or
there-
not we've attributed it correctly.
There would still be something of an operating shortfall in the year 2002.
How much?
Of about $25,000. They do have sufficient fund balance to cover that for at least the year 2002, but unless we can either improve the revenues or curtail the expenses over there a little bit for the year 2003, you might be looking at having to transfer $75,000 instead of $50,000.
So we have some work to do over there on this coming year.
Most definitely.
Okay.
If I could just add, our new daycare lease does increase the revenues that are brought in from the daycare facility there, and also includes a provision where they pay for their portion of the utilities that are associated with their part of the building.
Okay, Barb asked the question I wasn't gonna ask because I just didn't think 50,000. The YMCA, aren't part of their funds coming from Park and Recreation, because aren't they running that? So in other words, part of it's community center, part of it's recreation, or is it split somehow?
I don't know how it's split exactly. Charlie could probably explain that better, but yes, they do both functions.
We have a contract with the YMCA to run the city's recreation program and also to manage the community center. Under that under the way that we've chosen to budget for the fees paid to YMCA under that contract, half the fees are charged to the YMCA and the other half are charged to the general fund recreation budget, and that is reflecting the fact that they are running the city's recreation program, and most cities do have to subsidize their recreation program with property tax monies.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Thank you, David, as always. Council or any other residents have any comments at this public hearing?
I have a couple questions.
Yes, you, sir. Please come forward and state your name for the record and your address.
Gene Anderson, I'm at 2948 Wooddale Drive. And a couple of concerns. I think we got into a new police officer a few years back. The federal government was underwriting the cost of putting police officers in communities. Now apparently that fund has been pulled and we're underwriting the cost of that. We're adding another police officer now based on another state program or a city program, a sheriff program that's supposed to generate half the salaries or whatever into the fund for the city. And it seems like our population is staying stable. Our number of police officers is increasing. Our crime rates are supposedly decreasing. And I'm wondering, where are we putting these people? And along that same line, I have one more question, I guess. The weeks that the police reports appear in the paper are published, in the 2200 block of Highway 10, and I assume it's the Mermaid or something, but the number of calls down to that property, the number of people that are arrested, and thank God they are, but at the same time, when I look at the city of Minneapolis, for example, if they have X number of calls to a property for police service, when it comes license time, they review that, need it based on the needs of that community. And I'm wondering, at what point do we question that and have them underwrite the cost of this police protection that we're providing to them, because it's a disproportionate amount to all the rest of the citizens of the community. And I guess that would probably be my start questions. I was amazed at the 20% increase, and that's why I'm here tonight. When I first saw the 21.4, but I understand your homestead situation. But I'm concerned at cost of government continuing to increase, number of people being served staying pretty much stable, and I'm hoping that this council can get a handle on that.
Barbara, if you let me
Go for
first.
it.
Thank you. Just real quick with your comments regarding the police. The grant program, we always know, has a tendency and a point in which it dries up. I think the issue that the deputy chief was making is that historically participation in this drug task force process, which is a multi-jurisdictional process, leads to forfeiture funds on a consistent basis, and unless you eradicate the problem completely, which is a benefit also, those forfeiture funds tend to be somewhat consistent, and which is why he was speaking in terms of averages. The population has remained relatively consistent. He would have to comment as to where the crime levels are at. I think what we are seeing, however, and which is where our interest in this particular program lies, is that we do have an increasing problem with drugs and the effects that drugs have on our community. I think that the deputy chief can confirm that we have had crack house arrests in Moundsview. that we have methamphetamine situations in the city of Mounds View. And whereas the population has remained somewhat the same, the problems that our officers have to face are growing in their degree of severity. And the participation in this this type of a drug task force gives us more assets that, you know, the drugs that are bought here and used here don't simply reside here, that there's a connection to New Brighton, a connection to Roseville, a connection to Minneapolis, and this multi-jurisdictional process that we would be partaking in gives us assistance where something is squashed in St. Anthony and as a result has an ancillary effect in Mounds View and vice versa. So with regards to that program, that's really where my personal support derived from that. Barbara, go ahead, I won't take any more time.
We might actually be able to help you leave here a much happier man. Now, please correct me if I'm wrong, but when we approved the new license for the Mermaid, we did take into account, and that was part of the formula issue that we did with the increased police calls. That's part of the formula. It's all adjusted, so all of that is factored in on their licensing, so they don't get relicensed until that's factored in.
Okay.
So that might help there. And the addition of the 2 police officers was tied to getting the grant. So because we didn't get the grant, we had to do some adjusting and do things. So those 2 police officers, the way that was presented at the beginning, was not added. We went back, and I think what we finally did is this one position we're talking, there's not 3 new ones, it's 1 new one that we have adjusted because we did not get the grant. So we're adding 1 police officer, not 3.
Okay.
So let's see, that's 2. And then we've got the overall size of government only increasing at 2.78%, which is less than the cost of living. So considering what we've had, I'm pretty impressed overall.
Well, on that side, but at the same time now,
Yeah, but I'm just saying our overall budget, what we spend as a government, regardless of where it came from,
Okay.
we only increased by 2.78%, period.
and I guess we should be.
I think we can do more, but at this point,
Okay.
I just wanted to add too that we were police force was, as far as staffing the shifts, we were kind of, one of the shifts was kind of an odd man out, and during one of the shifts, a portion of one of the shifts, there was only 1 officer on duty in the city. And so that officer, if anything happened, would, number 1, would have no backup, and number 2, if he would be answering a call with a burglary in a home, we only have 1 officer, so anything else could be going on in the city, and we just kind of wanted to, you know, I think it's always good, especially in law enforcement, from what I've heard, and I've had friends in law enforcement, they're always much more comfortable if they know there's a backup out there if an emergency comes up.
Certainly. The other big concern is the franchise fees that seem to continue to expand. When they were first instituted, the Northern States Power, it's tax to us people. We're paying it in a different pocket, but it's going to the same place. And again, this year, we understand that it's increased again, the amounts, the percentage-wise. Is that
Nope.
right?
Remain the
Nope.
same.
Absolutely the same.
Absolutely.
That is staying locked.
Static.
That has been static for how many years?
Well, what you may be thinking of.
We haven't increased the rate.
No,
For
no,
at least
that's-
3.
It's at least
At least
2
3
years.
years,
This will
yeah.
be the 3rd year.
Yeah, this will be the 3rd year, counting this one.
What you may be having it mixed up with is that the allocation of the franchise fee dollars has been changing to a greater allocation going to a street reconstruction fee.
Fund.
Fund,
excuse me,
not a
thank
fee.
you, fund. This year, an increase was not possible because of having to make some adjustments for those homestead agricultural credit losses. And then I'll throw one more I remembered in real quick. What you see in the newspaper, and is Tim still here? You can correct me if I'm wrong, Tim. When you see the 2200 block, it doesn't necessarily indicate that it was a call to the Mermaid every time. Oftentimes our officers
Right.
with due diligence are simply watching for behaviors as people leave that would lead to a
Okay.
DUI arrest. So every one of those that are printed aren't exactly phone calls to the department.
Okay.
Is that right, Tim?
So are you leaving here a happier man?
I think so.
Okay, that's good.
And just to answer one of Mr. Anderson's questions for anyone else that might be watching, because this issue was brought up, that the population of Mounds View has been relatively static for a long time. When I started here in 1980, since that time, the population has not grown significantly. However, on the police department, back in 1980, I pulled up all the numbers, and we responded to about 5,000 calls for service and/or tickets were issued during that particular year. The last year where I have accurate numbers was 1999, so about 20 years later, and that number's gone over 10,000. So although our population hasn't increased significantly, we're much more busy. We're writing more tickets and/or responding to a lot more calls for service. So that's part of the justification for additional manpowers to handle that additional workload.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I
David,
just-
jump back up,
Want
yeah.
to speak up? And David Jank, 8418 East.
She rolls her eyes.
And who rolled their eyes?
I think she has.
In response to his franchise fees, and I gotta also recurse your memory, that franchise fees, I remember the meeting clearly, the battles, was put on there just to help us out through a period. Once that baby got on there, we never got rid of it.
No, it was stated that that would be revisited year by year.
Every year.
as we
Right,
went.
revisited, but there was a sunrise clause. They said it was, don't
Yeah.
kid me, you ain't fooling me about that. They said it was to help out, we were gonna have that franchise fees, it was gonna be revisited. There was a sunrise clause, the whole business. And one mayor even said it was gonna go down and all this stuff, and it's still there. It seems like when we get a tax on, we do never get rid of it. I agree with you.
Oh,
And it comes right out of our pocket.
Now you got Roger all stirred up.
Yeah, well, I'm just gonna
That's,
I
That's-
remember that. I was down here battling with that franchise.
it's hard to argue with that one, because that's kind of
It
close to.
started at about 2.5%, now we're up to 4%, and that's the maximum, and that's where we're at.
More time.
Actually, I don't think there is a maximum.
Yes, there is.
There's a maximum in our contract, and we're
Oh,
at
in the
it.
contract.
Yep.
Statutorily, I don't think there is.
No.
Is there anyone else that wishes to speak at the public hearing this evening? Thank you for your participation and your attendance. 9:02, public hearing is closed.
What time did it actually open?
Can we open?
Yeah.
I think it was 8:08.
Wow, we did that in an hour.
Kathleen, what is the next date that we deal with this budget issue? Is it the 10th?
December 10th.
Okay. Item 7B this evening is a public hearing and consideration of an appeal of the Planning Commission denial of a variance requested by Harstead Companies regarding the proposed Longview Estates major subdivision planning case VR 01-010. 9:03, this public hearing is open. Mr. Erickson.